Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Alpha Ambassador, and in this series of short video tutorials we're going to deep dive into Sony's new menus that we see on cameras such as the A7 IV and the Alpha 1. So without much further ado, let's get started. Perhaps some of the most important settings to master on our Sony Alpha cameras is the focus systems. Now this is a companion video tutorial to one called Focus Mode, so if you haven't watched that, I would watch that one first and then come back to this focus area video tutorial. Now by default we can change the focus area by pressing the C2 key on the top of most full frame Alpha cameras. We can then change the focus area very quickly even when the viewfinder is at our eye. Now what you'll be presented with is a vertical row of options on the left hand side, starting with the wide focus area, which is the default focus area, and then getting ever smaller as we go down. And we'll use the front dial to move up and down that row of items. Now there are two of these focus area options that have submenus, and we access those by going sideways using the rear dial. These are the spot AF points, and right at the bottom the focus tracking. For every focus area on the left hand side there will be the same focus area but in tracking mode on the bottom there, and we'll look at what tracking means in very shortly. If you get to that bottom row where the tracking options live and you see the icon grayed out, then the focus mode needs to be switched from AFS or AFA to AFC for that to become active, so we can now start selecting those tracking options. Now we'll start with the top option on that left hand side, which is a non-tracking focus area. It's just wide. All we have to do is keep the subject that might be moving roughly in the center of the frame, and we shouldn't have any foreground obstacles in front of the subject that we're photographing on, otherwise the focus will jump to that foreground subject because it is closer. For perhaps 90% of the time this wide focus area does a great job, because for most people the subject is close to the center of the frame and it is the closest thing to the camera. And we are then using all of the focus AF points on the sensor, and some people coming over from different systems such as Canon for instance will want to choose a single focus point, but this creates a lot of work trying to put a single focus point on a moving target, and generally 99% of the time the camera would have just picked the subject by default. Occasionally you don't want to use the whole frame because there might be something in the foreground, like I'm shooting a picture of this wallaby and there's some foreground bushes, and the camera does have a risk of jumping to that foreground obstacle if it gets anywhere near the center of the frame. So a quick override without changing the focus area is just to depress the multi-selector or joystick. This comes out of AFC focus mode and out of the wide focus area and goes into AFS and center fix, and so this is a very quick override if we just need to focus on a static object that's in the center of the frame. Now you'll probably see that I was using a focus area that was colored red. That is an option. White is the default, but if you want to come into the menus, the AFMF page 2, you can switch the focus area color from bright white to red on this Alpha 7 IV camera. Now I don't automatically come down from a wide focus area into a spot focus area. I will typically start with a zone for my portraiture at events and also my action sports. So here we've got a zone in the center of the frame. Now what this zone is basically doing is it's ignoring every obstacle that is outside of that focus area, and it's using the same algorithms as the wide but now only inside a smaller surface area of the sensor. So long as this subject that I'm photographing is central and close, it is going to ignore any obstacles that are much closer or subjects that are much closer on the left and right sides of the frame. It is also very quick to move a zone to one side of the screen or another, because there are only 9 possible positions for this zone rather than hundreds of possible positions for a small spot. So as I'm going down to a zone and moving it to the right, this is going to ignore ignore that character on the left side of the frame. And again, I don't have to resort to moving down to a small spot AF point. If you do have to go down to a spot AF point from a zone, then the first port of call I would recommend is the expand spot. It will use that smaller central area if it can find an edge of suitable contrast, but if it can't, it'll expand out automatically looking for an edge of good contrast so it can focus really quickly. If you put a small spot over an area of continuous tone without any edges of high contrast, then you can experience a hunting of focus. The camera might focus forwards and backwards, unable to find the subject because there are no edges of reasonable contrast for it to lock onto. Now occasionally we don't have to come out of wide focus area if we've got a subject where the camera detects there's an eye. So here I've come from human IF to bird IF on the A7lV. We've got an eye of good definition here, so the camera instantly knows there's a bird to be photographed. It is going to ignore any branches that are closer than the bird, and it'll push right through even in the wide focus area and focus on the bird. There are some birds, however, with less distinctive eyes where you will need to come down into that expand spot, or if the foliage is really tight, you might have to come down to the smallest spot AF area. Let's take a quick look at when we need to use the tracking options. So we come down to the bottom of the row. We've now cycled over to the right to look for expand spot in the tracking options. Now this owl was perched, but I knew it was about to take off and I knew it was going to move over to the right side of the frame. So I've put a spot AF point on the side of the frame, and when the bird takes off, the camera is going to track that bird across the frame even if I'm not keeping that spot AF point over the bird's face. It is basically going to be able to track that now it's locked on to the bird. So here's another great example of when tracking helps us to stay with the subject. Here I've been tracking this kite surfer standing on the beach, and somebody walks in front of the camera. Now if we didn't have the tracking option, if we just had the regular wide focus area or zone focus area, then the camera is going to eventually pull focus on the person walking in front of the camera, because those are the algorithms that wide uses, center and close. But because I'm using the tracking icon, it knows that my subject is at a certain distance. It's already seen it's got a face, perhaps an eye, and it's tracking that object at that distance. Now if that subject temporarily disappears behind an obstacle, the tracking will carry on focusing at that distance for a number of frames, waiting for the subject to re-emerge. Now you might be able to shoot 2 or 3 frames where the subject is not in view at all, and then still be able to track that when it reappears. Here you see a bird completely disappear for 2 entire frames, and even on one of those frames we've only got the tip of one wing visible. So you can see 3 frames where the camera has not pulled focus to that foreground obstacle. Now if we're trying to get the tracking as sticky as possible, we'll come into the AF/MF menu, page 1, look for AF tracking sensitivity and move it from say 3 standard down to 1 locked on, which is the stickiest setting. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those other options in the AF/MF page 2. You can see there we can look at the tracking options or just the focus area options, but we've got much faster access by assigning that to a custom key, and it is assigned to the C2 key by default. We can come down to focus area limit, because if we're cycling through different focus areas looking for the ones we want, we shouldn't really be expected to cycle through the focus areas which we never choose. So here I've deselected medium spot and large spot in the normal options and in the tracking options, so I'll be cycling more quickly between the small spot and the expand spot without having to go through 2 more focus areas, which I rarely if ever use. Let's take a look at the switch vertical horizontal AF area. It will be off by default, But for people who often shoot in the vertical orientation and are tired of keep on moving the focus point to a different area of the screen, this could be a game changer for those photographers. So let's go down and choose AF point and AF area, and I'll show you an example where now I'm photographing this emu and it's in the head is in the center of the frame, so I'm just using a zone to lock on there. But as I move the camera into vertical orientation, I normally want the focus area to be towards the top of the frame, so that's what I've done with the zone. So as I rotate the camera from vertical to horizontal, every time I return it to horizontal, the zone will be in the center, and every time I move back to vertical mode, the zone will be at the top of the frame. And this also works when you're positioning a spot AF point as well. Finally, let's take a look at the touch panel pad settings. There is a way of another way of overriding the wide focus area, which is very useful, and so I'll just go through that now. We'll touch panel and pad, we'll select both valid. We'll come down to our touch pad settings. Now if you keep on accidentally touching the bottom right corner of the monitor with your nose and then the focus area moves to that bottom right hand corner, just select the operation area as upper right. This means that when you use the touchpad, you'll first have to put your thumb on the upper right side and then drag your thumb across the screen to find your subject. Now, so this is an alternative to using that center fix that we looked at before, which was a way of overriding the focus area into AFS, center fix. Now, the alternative with working with the touchpad, however, is we'll get a crosshair that we can then slide over to the subject. And instead of going into AFS, we'll now initiate tracking, even though we didn't have a tracking AF area selected. So that is a very useful and quick way of not having to change the AF area, but just coming and selecting maybe a spot point and with tracking as well. If you found this information useful, head over to patreon.com/Mark Gaylor. I'm offering an Alpha Creative Skills support channel where you can download a 500-page camera-specific ebook, and I've covered most of the late model Alpha cameras. You'll also be able to download a camset file if you own one of the later model Alphas. You'll be able to set up your entire camera with just a single file copied to a memory card. I also offer additional ebooks for people to download to help them master the skills of creative photography, and also a range of 1-hour seminars that look at the using the camera gear to the best effect and also to build up your skills of photography in general. So head over to patreon.com/Mark Gaylor.